everybody. Here we go!
In case of emergency, the exits are here, anywhere. Keep your hands and arms inside the carpet. We...
Name is Hades, Lord of the Dead. Hi, how you doing? We dance, we kiss, we schmooze, we carry on, we go home happy. What do you say? Come on.
I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Ladies and gentlemen, you could have been anywhere in the world tonight, but you're here with us on this podcast. So stop the clock, take time out, time to regroup. Now come dance through life, because there is no day but today. In fact, I've often wondered, what do you do with a BA in English? I suppose I could move out to Oklahoma, where the wind comes sweeping down the plain. So climb aboard and hop right in, me ducky. I'll drop you down on Skid Row and maybe end up doing the cell block tango. Because all that it takes is a little reinvention. It's easy to change if you give it your attention. It's lights up on Washington Heights, because tonight, the world is full of light, with suns and moons all over the place, because there ain't a thing that you can do when the weather takes a turn on you. After all, nighttime sharpens, heightens each sensation. Darkness wakes and stirs imagination. I mean, you produce 61 podcasts and hundreds of hours of content, and see how you handle it. And if you haven't guessed by now, the Disney guys Uncensored and a very special guest are headed to the Great White Way. Welcome, Ohana. This is episode 61, recorded on May 18th, 2020. We are your hosts, Bub, Drew, Tim, and Jordana. So please come journey with us as we take a trip to Broadway to discuss Disney theatrical productions. Before we get there, let's head over to BuzzTube.
Hey, Gord! Gord!
If I can just find...
Gord! Oh, there you are.
Thanks, Bub, for that amazing introduction. Kind of funny and cool to sit here and listen to you kill it over there. And for all those out there that didn't get all those references, there are many, many, many of them in there. So take a look. They're pretty cool. But BuzzTube, yes, we have some small things to discuss. But one big thing, we want to give a huge shout out and a big thank you to our newest Patreon subscriber, Kathy Carnes. Thank you so much for supporting us. It means the world to us. And just all of you listeners out there, for as little $2 a month, you could be just like Kathy and listen to some amazing pre-show, sometimes some post-show. You even get some, little inside information on what our topic is going to be for the week over in our Discord channel. You could even be like our good guest there, Dana, tonight, who's also a Patreon supporter. So thank you, Dana. So there's tons of cool content over there. If you haven't done it, please give us a thought. Give us a little mention over there. It's $2. Speaking of that, if you don't want to, or you don't really have the money right now to afford to do that, there's other ways you can help us. And I'm talking of giving us a little bit of a review or maybe a 5-star rating over on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen to us, if they can do that. Even if not, Facebook. You can go on our Facebook page and give us a review on there as well. It really helps us grow as an audience. And right now we do have a little, I don't want to say promotion because that sounds a little cheesy, but we got a little thing going on. If you can prove to us that you do a little review for us, we will send you some stickers in the mail. Jordana and I just ordered a huge new bundle of stickers and some thank you cards, and that will be here shortly. So we are eager to get those out to all of you guys. So please, and as I mentioned, if you do sign up as Patreon, we will also get you some stickers. So make sure you consider that and all of that. So again, thanks for all the love, all the support, and I think we have a lot of theater conversation about to happen tonight. So let's head on over to the topic of the week.
Thank you, Drew. Thanks again, Kathy for signing up for Patreon. We really do appreciate it. I want to take a quick second before I speak about Dana to give a shout out to a good friend of mine. Little Zoe turned 6 today. Happy birthday, Zoe. And Drew, she's a fantastic little girl. You got yourself a good one there. You got
my hands full. The big blue eyes is going to make me a little nervous as she gets older, but I got a little bit of time.
So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Zoe and thank Andrew for coming on his daughter's birthday. That is true dedication. So a little bit about our guest tonight, as we are very fortunate to welcome Dana Knox to the show. Now, I'm sure a lot of you listeners are asking, who is Dana Knox and why should I care? And I'm here to tell you that you are wrong when you say that, because you should care about our guest tonight. Because he is the production coordinator for college theater and director of the first-year arts program at Harvard University. He oversees all theatrical activity for the Office of the Arts and collaborates with leadership of the Theater, Dance, and Media program and the Harvard Radcliffe Dramatic Club to mount theater in venues all over campus. He was on the opening team at Farkas Hall, formerly the New College Theater, and was the departmental producer for the launch of the TDM program for 4 years. Dana also spent 6 years working with Broadway in Boston as assistant theater manager for the Boston Opera House, the 2004 opening team, and house manager for the Colonial Theater. He has been a lecturer and administrator for the BU School of Theater, where he also received his MFA in production management, and he has worked in all disciplines of theater making and has also studied dance, studio art, and music, including and not limited to piano and voice. Dana, that's a hell of a place to be coming from. That is quite the resume, and I can think of no one better to take us to Broadway than a man that has the credentials that you have. So thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks for taking time out of your day and your schedule to hang out with us. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really well. I'm thrilled to be here, a fan of the podcast, and Disney Theatricals is something that has always interested me. I've worked on several shows, so I'm really excited to chat about it.
Well, I can speak for the guys and gals here that I know that we're excited to have you, and I know that we had talked. I think it was around Christmas time or so. You kind of said, it might have been before that, you sent us an initial email and you had talked to us about maybe doing a theatrical program or a theatrical show here. And I think what happens here a lot of times with us is we're comfortable talking about a lot of things, and we tried to have the show molded that way where we would want to do shows that were important to us. And I'm not taking a shot at Andrew or Jay here, but I think I was the pusher of a Broadway show in the original incarnation of our podcast. And I found out Tim also now with us, big fan of theater, and having a third voice in the room that is as distinguished and as well versed in it as you are, I think only helps us produce the best content. So I'm glad that we waited 61 episodes to get this one together, to be honest with you. I think if we had done it any earlier, it wouldn't have worked out the way I hope tonight works out. So certainly I'm going to turn it over to my co-host Tim, who is going to talk to Dana about some very interesting productions, maybe a house as well, who knows, and I'll catch up with you guys a little later on.
Thanks, Bob. Welcome to the show, Dana. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing very well.
All right. Well, I think we should start our journey through Disney on Broadway with a tale as old as time, Disney's first Broadway theatrical production, Beauty and the Beast. It's founded in 1993 by longtime Disney Entertainment veteran Ron Logan as Walt Disney Theatrical. The division gained a reputation within the industry for creating a professional and popular, both critically and financially, performances, starting with Beauty and the Beast on April 18th, 1994. The company is a division of the Disney Theatrical Group led by Thomas Schumacher. Beauty and the Beast premiered as a joint production of Theater Under the Stars and Disney Theatrical at Music Hall, Houston, Texas, from November 28, 1993 through December 26, 1993. The show then moved to previews in New York City on March 9, 1994, and officially opened at the Palace Theater on April 18, 1994. The musical was the first Broadway adaptation by Disney, based on the 1991 animated film by Linda Wolverton, with music and lyrics by Alan Menken, Howard Ashman, and Tim Rice. The show ran until July 29th, 2007 at the Lunt-Fontanne Theater to make room for another Disney production, The Little Mermaid. At 5,461 performances, the show was in the top 15 of the longest-running shows on Broadway history, and as of January 2020, was the 10th highest grossing production of all time, with a gross of almost $430 million. So, Dana, that sounds like a pretty prolific show for their first shot at this Broadway thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was really a spectacular production. I remember I was I think a freshman in college when it first came out, and I was very interested in theater, and of course have a long-standing history with Disney. So I was very excited that it was that it was coming in, and that it was expanded. There was new music in it, and it was it was a really stunning production. I've seen it both in the original production on Broadway at the Palace Theater before it moved, and then also on tour a few times. I've gotten the chance to work house management on it, and it's it's just one of those shows that really delights audiences.
Now, Beauty and the Beast, I mean, we're going to get into their other shows after, was very much a literal adaptation of the animated film. They were really coming off that high of the Academy Award Best Picture nomination. Beauty and the Beast, of course, was the first animated feature to ever be nominated for Best Picture. So they kind of were really literally translating that from the screen to the stage, would you say?
Yeah, it was a very, very lush production. Disney doesn't skimp when it comes to creativity and when it comes to fulfilling artistic vision. And it was a stunningly gorgeous production, but it was very rooted very much in the realism. Realism as much as you can say when a show about a magic spell. But it very much was. It was heightened from what you would imagine like a theme park show being, greatly heightened. But it definitely was a much more literal translation when you look at some of the future productions that Disney does.
Now, this show did have a pretty positive critical response, but was there any apprehension? Do you remember when this show first came out, with people thinking that maybe this wasn't proper almost of Disney to kind of jump into more of the high art space from what they had been doing?
Yes, I think it was. It was a tremendously hostile reception, I think, from a lot of the theater community at the time on Broadway, because whereas in the golden age of Broadway, you'd have shows that were more lighthearted, the family friendly. You'd have the My Fair Ladies, the Guys and Dolls, Bye Bye Birdies, and in the 70s and 80s, Broadway was getting more kind of hard hitting and gritty. You would get into the Chorus Line, the Phantom, the Les Mis, Miss Saigon. So I think when Disney came in, people saw it as big corporation coming into this art scene on Broadway. So it was met with some resistance from the Broadway community. I think until they started, building up a bigger reputation. But I think the audiences were thrilled. People were still riding high off of the Best Picture nomination that Beauty and the Beast got just, a handful of years prior. So it was definitely a story that people wanted to see.
Yeah. So what better way for Disney to really cement their legitimacy in this Broadway space than do the Disney thing and get their own piece of real estate right there on the Great White Way? And Disney found that home in the New Amsterdam Theater. The New Amsterdam Theater is located at 214 West 42nd Street between 7th and 8th Avenue in the Theater District of Manhattan, right smack there in Times Square. The theater was used as a stage production house from its opening in the early 20th century through the 1930s. It was then used as a movie theater for a while. There was a nightclub on the roof. And then for 50 years, it was a movie theater, and then it closed in the early 80s. Now, the 80s in Times Square was nothing like it is today, where, there's bootleg Mickey Mouse and bootleg Iron Man running around trying to take the pictures with kids, and every chain store and restaurant you can imagine. It was a really gritty, dirty, seedy place. And the theaters were really far cry from the golden age of theater in New York. And the New Amsterdam was probably the worst of all of them. Decades of abuse and neglect had left it in a total shambles. And Dana, you had mentioned some specific details about that I think are just wild. If you want to go into that.
Oh yeah, there were lots of theaters that were kind of in similar shape after the suburban sprawl in the 50s and 60s. A lot of the downtown areas became very economically depressed. The theaters went legitimate performing theaters went to movie theaters and then just shuttered their doors. So most of the ceiling had collapsed in. There was several feet of standing water that were just in the basement. And it's amazing, in the center of Manhattan, the center of Times Square, there was this huge footprint of property that was just falling apart. Mushrooms growing in the auditorium because it was just so dank and dark and derelict. So there was a movement to kind of revitalize a lot of these theaters, but it was just a massive, massive investment.
Yeah, and speaking of that investment, the New York City Industrial Development Corporation raised $4 million in bonds to purchase the property from its owners, basically bringing it back into the city rather than private ownership in 1982. They retained the title. With the Nederlander organization responsible for that bond payment. Now, the Nederlanders are this big, almost like a theater cabal family. There's a couple of these families, the Nederlanders, the Schuberts. Is there any others, Dana?
The Jujamsons are a big company of real estate owners in Times Square.
Yeah, and they own all these Times Square theaters. When you think of a Broadway theater, they all have these different names, the Gershwin, the Winter Garden. But they're pretty much all going to be owned by these three companies, except in 1992, New York State would take back the New Amsterdam from the Nederlanders because they kind of just walked away from it. They spent $15 million on the property and just decided that they weren't going to be able to do it. This theater was in too bad shape. So Disney walked in, and being Disney, they were pretty high on the success of Beauty and the Beast on Broadway, and they really wanted their own theater. And when others say it can't be done, Disney throws a bunch of money and really smart people at it, and they turned this theater around at the cost of $34 million in 1997 dollars, which would be about $55 million today. And in just 2 years, they had this theater back to, would you say, better than its original glory?
In some ways, I think there was a lot of effort made to preserve the historic elements of the auditorium itself. So the portion that the audience would see when going to see a show there would be very reminiscent of what it was like back in the day when Florenz Ziegfeld was running the Follies there. However, backstage and in the basement systems and the support spaces, that there was a lot more technology and a lot more of adaptation to like contemporary needs, increasing like the electrical needs and putting in stage lifts and all of that. So in that way, it was actually better. But it's also important to note that Disney also got a really sweetheart deal from the city, which I think also alienated them a little bit from some of the other producing entities on Broadway. Because the city of New York agreed to foot a huge portion of that restoration fee for them, because they very much wanted Disney as a company in Times Square to help gentrify and transform and pull in families and to really help the neighborhood. So that also got some of the other companies, I think, a little antsy, because I think the Nederlanders probably would have love to have had a deal that was as sweet as the one that Disney had.
Yeah, but you can't really blame the city of New York. At the time, they're really trying to turn Times Square around, and the Nederlanders had just, walked away from the project and said, we can't do this. So, I mean, you really, really can't blame them. So Disney used the theater to premiere the animated film Hercules. They did it in limited engagement of the concert version of King David, which I'm not familiar with that at all. You had some interesting points about that.
That was it was a very ephemeral piece that kind of came up, and I performed just a handful of performances, and then it kind of went away. And I have not, in all of my years of working in theater since, kind of seen anything or have ever even heard any of the music from that particular show. Although I do know somebody who was in that production, a friend of mine who's an actor. But even from the stories that he tells, I mean, it was just such a short little blip on his resume that he didn't have a lot more insight to share.
But Disney had their theater, and they needed a production fit for a king. So in November of 1997, Disney would stage their Broadway theatrical adaptation of the animated classic The Lion King. The Lion King is a musical based on the 1994 Disney Animation Studios feature film of the same name, with music by Elton John, lyrics by Tim Rice, a book by Roger Allers and Irene Michi, along with additional music and lyrics by Lebo M., Mark Mancia, Jay Rifkin, Julie Taymor, and Hans Zimmer. Directed by Taymor, the music features actors in animal costumes as well as giant hollow puppets. The musical debuted on July 8th, 1997 in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the Orpheum Theater and was successful before premiering on Broadway at the New Amsterdam Theater on October 15th, 1997. On June 13th, 2006, the Broadway production moved to the Minskoff Theater, where it is still running today after more than 9,000 performances. It is Broadway's third longest running show and has grossed more than $1 billion, making it the highest grossing Broadway production of all time. Over 100 million people worldwide have seen the musical. It has earned numerous awards and honors, including 6 Tonys, 1 for Best Musical and 1 for Best Director of a Musical, making director Julie Taymor the first woman ever to earn such an honor. Versions of the production have amassed an astounding 46 award nominations with 25 wins. That's a big deal that Julie Taymor was the first woman to win such an honor, right?
Oh yeah, and it was very well deserved. And it kind of she was not a major kind of director on Broadway at that point. She did a lot of work in regional theater, and she had a spectacular reputation for creative interpretations. But she was always a little more avant-garde than some of the standard Broadway fare. So the fact that she came in and she brought this artistic vision to Lion King that really fused, the art world and the pop culture world together into this juggernaut, which all those statistics you were saying are really wonderful. But The Lion King, the stage show, is the single most profitable entertainment commodity ever. It's over almost up to $6.5 billion that it is cumulatively raised. And that's not only from, of course, the Broadway production, but it has upwards of 8 to 10 international productions, national tours. There's subsidiary rights such as, cast recordings, merchandise. But it is the most profitable entertainment entity ever.
Yeah, I mean, it's still touring today, right?
Oh, yeah, they have several. I think they still have 2 running. There was the Gazelle Tour and the Cheetah Tour, and then several international sit-down productions, all over the world. And
then I know schools do it all the time. I work in education. One of the elementary schools in my district, before all this COVID-19 stuff happened, this was going to be their school production this year, was the kids' version of it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, hopefully they'll just try to do it again next year instead of doing something else. Now this show, where Beauty and the Beast was much more of a literal adaptation of animated film, Julie Taymor really kicked it up a notch here and took it to the next level. It's much more of an artistic interpretation of what had happened on the screen. And she made some changes also. The biggest was she recognized that the cast of The Lion King is very, very male. So there wasn't really any female main characters. So she went ahead and changed Rafiki's gender to female for the Broadway production, and that stayed. Rafiki is a female character played by a woman in the stage version of The Lion King. But the costumes are so amazing and just incorporate so much cultural richness into the production itself. Just draws from all those cultures that the animals come from.
Yeah, it's she really did a spectacular job there. The cultural representation was a huge step forward. Particularly on Broadway, the fabrics and the beadwork that were used were directly taken from several African tribes. There was forms of narrative storytelling that she incorporates into the show that are storytelling means from Africa, from Asia, from Indonesia. Like the shadow puppets are shown kind of Indonesian cultural storytelling technique that they pop up in a couple times, like the little mouse that's kind of running across that Scar catches to eat in one of the opening scenes is all done with shadow puppets. So she uses a lot of technique, different techniques to kind of tell the story. But she also, when confronted with the problem of, how do we make actors look like animals? She was just like, well, let's not hide the actors. This is theater. You can have a suspended sense of disbelief in theater that you could not necessarily have in film. And so she leaned into that and found different ways for each animal of incorporating the human into it. And if you've seen the show, after the first 10 minutes of it, you just stop thinking of it, and you just are following the characters of the show. It's really brilliant.
Yeah, the costuming and set design in the show, it's just such an elegant sidestepping of that issue to not have, the two-man horse costume, for lack of a better term, that you would think that people dressed up as animals would be. I mean, the giraffes are all stilt walkers, and it's just incredible costuming. And you see the costuming in this up close, because what happens in the first couple minutes of this show?
Yeah, well, it's the animal parade. The Circle of Life is just one of the most stunning numbers. I worked on this show for 8 months at the Boston Opera House. So it's 32 weeks, 8 shows a week, and I would pop in the back and watch Circle of Life every time, and I would still get chills. It was because if you've seen the show, they process down through the auditorium. So prior to the show starting, they have to seal off the lobbies. So don't show up late if you're going to see The Lion King, because you're going to get stuck outside until all the animals, process in. So I was always working in the lobbies when all those animals were getting set up, and it became a little tradition, because actors are very superstitious. In theater, we have superstitions that we follow, and it just started. I started a secret handshake with the actor who played Shenzi, who also happened to be one of the elephant's legs for the Circle of Life. Started a secret handshake, and then the little girl who played Nala, who also plays the baby elephant, and she wanted to get in it, so I had to rub the elephant's head. And then there was the water buffalo or something behind them, that then I had to pet that, and then I had to rub the horn of the rhino, and then I made my hands into little beaks, and I had to go over and kiss all of the birds for the women who played the flock of birds. And it was just every single night it was this tradition. And if I ever missed anybody, they would always get at me, and they'd come for me. They're like, come on, Dana, come on. So it was always just a really amazing tradition. And then I'd follow the elephant in, and I'd just stand in the back and watch the show.
No, that's great. So you are very familiar with production. This is during your time at the Boston Opera House.
Yes. It was the first show that we opened because the Opera House, very similar to the New Amsterdam Theater, was this derelict building right in the middle of downtown Crossing in Boston. And so, Clear Channel Entertainment at the time that was running Broadway in Boston invested, I think it was like a $44 million project to overhaul that. And The Lion King was the very first show that we had in. So we were working with Disney Theatricals for months and months in advance. We'd be having site visits with them to make sure that progress on the Opera House was going along, in time for opening.
And is that how this stuff works when a show like this has a tour or residency? Disney Theatrical will come in and basically they need to sign off that it's going to be done the right way, that the building is suitable, that the sets and the costumes and stuff are suitably presented to their standards?
Well, I mean, they don't really have a say into what happens with the construction of the Opera House because it was not their project. But of course, they do have a vested interest. They want to make sure that all of the deadlines are being hit and that they're going to have the time to load in the show because it's a huge show. So when we were renovating the Opera House, the first two productions we had in were this and then Phantom of the Opera after that. And they were the two biggest shows that were out on the road at that time. So we were actually designing a lot of elements in the theater, particularly backstage, to make sure that we could accommodate everything that they were bringing in.
Yeah, I mean, talking about all these dollar numbers. I've been a theater fan my whole life. I did not realize these are like movie numbers. I did not know that this much money flew around to get these things rolling for stuff that is ephemeral, that does not last forever, that always is going to be temporary, I guess, unless you're Lion King on Broadway, because then you've just been there forever.
Yeah, I mean, it was. One of my jobs at the Opera House was also to do financial reconciliation. And I just remember just like almost breaking into a sweat the first time I had to write a $1.2 million check and walk it down the hall to the Disney office, because that was just their share of that week's money. Now, granted, they also then had to like pay their cast and everything out of that. But it was it was a huge operation, but it was so well run. Like, I mean, the people that were there were really wonderful. It was a pleasure to work with them for 8 months.
That's awesome. But, things like this can't last forever. Even the mega success of The Lion King, Broadway, you have to keep things fresh. So eventually that show did close at the New Amsterdam Theater, and it was replaced by Mary Poppins. So a very different vibe than Beauty and the Beast or The Lion King. Mary Poppins is a classic musical. Even the movie's a musical. It has lyrics by the Sherman Brothers, those Disney legends, with additional lyrics and music from George Stiles and Anthony Drew. And the script is by Julian Fellows. It's based on a series of children's books from England. And in 1993, theatrical producer Cameron McIntosh met P.L. Travers and acquired the rights to develop a stage adaptation of the Mary Poppins books. So this is a bit contentious because unlike Beauty and the Beast and Lion King, this was kind of shared glory, which is not Disney's favorite thing to have to do.
No. No, they both needed each other, and even with their procurement of the New Amsterdam Theater, Disney likes to own every aspect of the profit margin. Why rent a theater and have somebody else making profit on that when they can run the theater? The same is true with rights and royalties. They want to make sure that they had the creative control to do what they wanted. However, they had the movie rights. Cameron McIntosh was able to negotiate the stage rights, and that was back in like the 70s or 80s that he got those from Pam Travers herself. But yeah, they needed it. If Disney wanted to do the show, they needed Cameron McIntosh's license. If Cameron Mackintosh wanted to do a version of Mary Poppins that anybody wanted to see, he needed the music from Disney. So neither was just going to give up what they had. So they had a collaboration, and actually was a very successful and fruitful collaboration.
Yeah. Now, I am not as familiar with Mary Poppins stage adaptation as I am with Beauty and the Beast or The Lion King. I did see this as a kid on Broadway. The only thing I remember is all the chimney sweeps dancing. But this seems like a very different show than the spectacles that were The Lion King or Beauty and the Beast. And also, it seems like it almost would be an easier adaptation because the movie, the source material itself, was a big Hollywood musical. With it seems like you could almost go 1-to-1 and just do that on stage. But that's not exactly what they did. They did make some little changes, added some numbers, took some stuff away. They no longer have Admiral Boom blowing his cannon to make the house shake on the hour, which I know is one of Bub's favorite gags in the movie. But was this a step down from those previous two Disney on Broadway productions?
I don't think so. And I think this is one of the things that Disney reluctantly suffers from, is that people like to compare and contrast, various shows against each other, and each one is very much its kind of own world and entity. Mary Poppins was I thought it was a very successful show. I really enjoyed it when I saw it. It was definitely a departure from the movie. It was much more acidic. There was a harshness to it that I think was in the books. That P.L. Travers was never particularly keen on all of the the sugar-coated happiness that was in
the Disneyfication of it.
The Disneyfication of it. So they had different, slightly different twists. Ashley Brown was the original Mary Poppins, and she was spectacular. First of all, one of my favorite Broadway actresses.
She is fantastic in whatever she is in. Just incredibly talented, so much presence.
Oh yes, and she was Mary Poppins, and she came in, but she was stern. She was, and they took various different vignettes out of the books too, that they kind of swapped in. As you mentioned, they took out like Uncle Albert, they took out Jolly Holiday, but then they put in several other things. And it was cool. And one of their challenges there was then to come up with the special effects, the magic that happened. And they did some really stunning things. Of course, one of the most well-known things is Mary Poppins actually flies off of the stage into the auditorium and up over everybody's heads. So if you've ever seen Phantom, she does the reverse chandelier. Going up, and then there were other things like Spoonful of Sugar. Instead of happening in the nursery, it happened in the kitchen with the cook, and the kids are making a mess and knocking everything off these shelves, and everything's a disaster. And they had to magically create all these things going back up, like all these bowls coming back together and jumping back up onto the shelf. And they really did some spectacular special effects for that.
Now, you, as a person who works in the theater, you obviously look at these shows with a different eye than the layman or even the theater fan would. Are these special effects, are they just going to dazzle somebody, or are they going to kind of go over the heads of a quote-unquote regular person, just your everyday theater patron who maybe goes to a big show once or twice a year?
Yeah, I think they'll dazzle anybody. I mean, they dazzled me, and I think the blessing and the curse for me is that because I work in theater, when I go in it, it's very rare that I just sit and am completely sucked in, transported. Often I'm sitting there looking and I'm like, oh, how are they doing that lighting trick? Or what is that stage mechanism doing? Or how are they going to handle this costume change? And or watching how the scene is directed. So that's just my brain and how I work. And there have been several things like with Disney. I remember the Beast transformation in Beauty and the Beast that I was just like, what just happened? How did they work that sorcery? And the same is true with some of the effects in Mary Poppins. Of course, the flying out of the audience, is definitely, she's on a cable. And similarly in Step in Time, Bert actually is doing this. He walks over to the proscenium arch, proceeds to walk up it sideways, and then across the top to the center of the top of the proscenium arch, where he then does a tap dance, upside down. And again, you can see that he's just on cables, but it's brilliant. And when you see it with all the lighting, the dim lighting, so that you can't really notice too much, it's just it's a great experience, and the audience just gets sucked in every time.
Now, is something like that Bert effect, is that like wire work? Is that how that's typically done, or a harness of some kind?
Yeah. He's wearing a harness, basically just like around his waist. It wasn't like a shoulder one or anything, but around his waist. So, and he had cables on each side, and so he was able to just walk up. And then, they had 2 cables on each hip, or one on each hip, and then they pulled him up tight against the top of the proscenium arch, tight enough that he could just tap dance.
Do a tap dance.
Yeah.
That is very impressive. But yeah, I guess those are the sorts of things that myself or Bub or Drew or Jordana is not gonna really be thinking about or notice. We're just gonna be wrapped up in the spectacle of it. So this was a very different production than Lion King or Beauty and the Beast, as I've said, but it still was very decorated. It got 7 Tony nominations, including Best Musical. It won for Best Scenic Design in a Musical. And it closed in March of 2013 after a very good 2,619 performances. So, I mean, this was another success for Disney Theatrical.
Yeah, it was. It was a long-running show. Well received, everything you said. And you can, for those listeners who are interested, there's a lot of video elements that are available on the internet. I fell into a deep hole the other night, kind of in preparation for this, just watching all these like obscure clips. And some of the obscure clips and some of the other shows that Disney has done, we're not going to get to tonight. But if you're curious about that Step in Time number, they have a high definition version that you can find online, and they have several of these others. They have the Feed the Birds duet, because the bird woman actually joins Mary Poppins in singing it. So you can find a lot of these online if you're interested.
So that is, I mean, you could find a lot of the things we're talking about in general online, maybe not the whole show, but some of the highlights. So once Mary Poppins ended, we go back to the big animated adaptations with Aladdin. So Aladdin, obviously based on the 1992 Disney animated film of the same name. The book was by Chad, I'm going to butcher this name, Begulin, and music by Alan Menken, the legendary Alan Menken. Lyrics by Howard Ashman, Tim Rice, and Begulin again. I'm probably butchering that name. Shout out to Drew. It premiered at the Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle in 2011 after several regional and international tryouts and productions in 2012, and it also had a tryout run in Toronto. So we've seen this with a couple of the productions. Is this common to before something goes to Broadway to kind of test market it in a medium, large type city before you shoot your shot?
Absolutely. It's actually almost imperative now. You have to have out-of-town tryouts. And this is nothing new. Out-of-town tryouts go back, to the 20s and 30s. I used to house manage at the Colonial Theater, and that has one of the richest histories of pre-Broadway tryouts of any theater in the country. But it's very common because you need to workshop, you need to work out the bugs, and you need to do it away from the New York press, because once you open your show, And pardon the pun, there's no getting the genie back in the bottle. Once you've opened it and have your reviews, you only get one chance to make a first impression. So Disney has started going to to farther farther cities to kind of try this out, just like Frozen opened in Denver. And that way you can figure out what works, get it in front of an audience, see what they're latching onto, see what they're kind of disinterested in. You can do, exit polls and stuff, and really just kind of hone the show to make it as tight as possible, to then bring it to Broadway and then have that be the official version. So if you're ever in one of these cities that a pre-Broadway tryout is happening, it's definitely worth going, because the version that you'll see could be a very unique version that with a number that will get cut that will never make it to Broadway, or other innovative things. So it's an interesting process to observe.
Yeah, so touching on that, like it is not uncommon that you see a show, it goes on in, Denver, DC, or Seattle, and they completely change almost everything. There's like a total rewrite. The choreography change, everything changes before it gets brought to Broadway, like almost top to bottom, right?
Oh yeah, one of the most infamous stories, and this is not Disney, but Dreamgirls premiered at the Schubert Theater in Boston, and they were going to end the Act One with a number sung by the three dreams, or the two dreams and the new third dream, when they asked Effie to leave the show. And of course they had this little side song that they gave to Effie called "I'm Telling You I'm Not Going." And they were going to cut it. And they were like, yeah, no, it's wasting too much time. We want to end with the new dreams. And the producers were convinced to keep it in for one or two shows just to see how the audience would react to it. And that one number got a middle of the act standing ovation, to the point that even though they were going directly into the next song, the actresses could not finish the next song. They had to stop halfway through because the audience would not stop applauding. So that's actually the version that you see now. That they have this little coda of the Dreamgirls coming in at the end of "I'm Telling You I'm Not Going," but they decided to keep that number in and actually really celebrate it because it's wonderful. So that type of thing happens all the time.
So yeah, listeners, if you live in one of these cities and there is a Broadway tryout run of a show, it's definitely worth seeing. Even if these big crazy changes don't happen, who knows? You might be there to witness the birth of the next Hamilton or the next Lion King, and you could say you saw it then before no one could get tickets, and they're $1 million.
A quick side note: how do you know it's like a pre-Broadway show? Just out of curiosity, is it advertised that way? Will it say it's a pre-Broadway or like?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No,
yeah,
that's okay.
Absolutely. No, that's actually a huge marketing boost. If you know something is pre-Broadway and it's playing in Boston, they stopped doing Boston because Boston was just too close in proximity to New York. So New York critics, hungry to get the story, would actually take the train up and see it in Boston. So that's why Boston doesn't do as many now. But out in Denver, when they were doing the pre-Broadway Frozen, I mean, you couldn't get a ticket.
Good to know. Yeah. I was just curious how they advertise.
Yeah.
Yep. So Aladdin finished its tryouts, test marketed really well. So it opened on Broadway at the New Amsterdam March 20th, 2014, and has been produced ever since. It, again, is one of the 15 highest grossing Broadway productions of all time. We're just going to keep saying it. And it's grossed over $400 million on Broadway. It's been seen by about 11 million people worldwide as of 2018, so that number is even higher now. This production, casting and characters-wise, has had some pretty significant controversies, though. Disney employed what they called a colorblind casting policy, but with the setting and characters of Aladdin being so tied to the culture of the Middle East and Arab culture, they ended up casting all white people in the starring roles for that original cast in Broadway, and this sparked some pretty significant complaints to the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee and numerous Middle Eastern civil rights groups. I know colorblind casting is a pretty common thing on Broadway, but it usually is kind of in the other direction, where you might have a Hispanic father and a white mother and black kids, but you suspend disbelief and you're caught up in it. So why was it a big deal that this happened for this show, Dana?
Well, first off, it wasn't all white. It wasn't an all white cast. It was diverse. There were Asian actors and black actors and Latinx actors. But anytime you're doing a show that is heavily cultural, where the culture is almost a character in itself, you just have to be aware of how you're casting, and colorblind casting is very admirable in many cases. I'm very much supportive of that for a lot of different shows, but when you're doing a show that is about an underserved community, like Arab Americans, and if you're doing the Broadway version, you can have a casting call and still get hundreds, if not thousands, of people coming out that fit that demographic, that you can really elevate an underserved community. You're given a great chance to do that. And so I think it was more a missed opportunity than any deliberate slight. But Disney pays attention, and over the course of a show, casts change regularly. So it was something that they were able to course correct on.
That's good to hear. And I mean, aside from the misstep when it comes to casting, this was a well-received production. 40 worldwide award nominations. It won 8 of them. Very positively reviewed. Kind of similar to the live-action adaptation of Aladdin last year. It stays pretty in line with the animated feature. The most highly praised role was James Monroe Iglehart doing Genie. He performed the role from 2014 till 2017. When he was asked about it, he said, "It's not as exhausted as you think. I'm an energetic guy in general, so basically I'm kind of just being me with the volume turned way up." And he only departed the cast in 2017 to be the Marquis de Lafayette / Thomas Jefferson in Hamilton. So, yeah, that was a very iconic role.
Yeah, I did not get to see him in the production other than what I've seen of clips online, including the Tony Awards where he sang was it A Friend Like Me? But he really is a spectacular, spectacular actor. But another important person of note in that cast was Jonathan Freeman as Jafar, because they got the original Jafar voice actor to come back and reprise the role of Jafar. So it was a really interesting thing. If you didn't know that going in, you'd all of a sudden be like, wow, that guy sounds exactly like I expect Jafar to sound like, because it was him.
Now, did he have a theatrical background before he was a voice actor, or was this like a first time sort of thing?
I believe so. I don't know his resume offhand, but I believe he comes from a theatrical background. Disney actually really gravitated towards that with their voice talent in animated movies, going for Broadway talents, because they tend to be lesser known, so they frankly have a lower price tag. But also they come with this amazing sense of diction and projection that you have to have when you're on a live stage. So that's why you have a Nikki Noni Rose, who was Susan Egan, Judy Kuhn as Pocahontas. All these people come from the theatrical realm.
The type of stage actors who are on Broadway, they really know how to fill a space with their voice. So that lends itself perfectly to animated animated work. So that ends our stroll down the Great White Way with Disney on Broadway, but that does not end our show with Dana, because Dana has given us a lot of facts and features about Disney on Broadway, but not much about Dana the man. So let's head on over to the Random House of Mouse.
Knocking at the House of Mouse. We're all knocking at the House of Mouse.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Dana. Certainly, Dan, I got to tell you, I was never a huge believer in Mary Poppins as a stage show until hearing you talk about the various effects and things they've done. So really good stuff there. And Tim, great job with that. And I think we're ready to loosen the ties a little bit, maybe put some cross trainers on, relax, sit down, get a drink, and we're going to talk shop with Dana about who he is, what he is, why he is, and then we're going to hear about maybe some non-Disney theatrical questions for you too. And of course, Dana, being a seasoned listener, you do understand that when you agree to come on the show, you agree to sit in the hot seat, as it were, and answer some rapid-fire questions for us as well. So,
oh yeah, I'm ready.
So I guess first and foremost, the first question is, we kind of ran down your resume a little bit, but who is Dana Knox?
I would say first and foremost, I'm an educator. That's that's the portion of my job that I really gravitate towards. I love theater. I love everything about the arts, and I'm very blessed to have been able to build a career in that. But what I love most is working with students, particularly on a collegiate level, because they're old enough to know a lot of stuff, but they're also not old enough or set in their ways to be inhibited. So I think that there's a creativity that comes out of not necessarily knowing the rules of what's supposed to work and what doesn't. So that's what keeps my work fresh for me is the interaction with the students. And then aside from that, I just kind of like a simple life. I like gardening, I like working on house projects, so Quarantine has been fine. My house has been getting tons of stuff done in it and all this.
Yeah, I think we've all done a little bit more housework over the last few months than we probably anticipated coming into Memorial Day weekend. So it is interesting to hear that. So really good stuff there, and obviously your accolades and the work you've done is probably second to none. But in your job, in the specific sector of theater that you deal with, there's always levels of expectation. If you're going to say you're going to put on a production of Phantom of the Opera, certain theater goers, certain people will have expectations of that show. For you, is that the great challenge for you as a theater man, to deal with known expectations and try to make a show fresh that maybe someone has seen?
I don't personally feel that kind of expectation. Again, that's one of the perks that you have when you work in academic theater, is that you're not necessarily relying on ticket sales to fund things. I think theater companies that actually mount works where they need them to be popular and they need to get butts and seats, it's much more of a concern there. But I think in academic theater, you really want to push the bounds. You want to try new things, and my students are very, very innovative and pretty smart if they're coming to Harvard. So I could have had students try for years and years to make something work that doesn't quite work, and then a new student will come along and try it, and I'll try to advise them and be like, I don't think that's going to work, but have at it. And they make it work. And so it's this constant learning process for me. And I actually, it's one of the things I like about theater is that it is kind of ephemeral. You do you do only have a short window of time to experience this one production that we're doing. And for me, that's very helpful when, in my 14 years at Harvard, you've had Sweeney Todd mounted 4 separate times. And as much as I love Sweeney Todd, you're like, okay, well, let's try something new. So I actually enjoy that. I don't feel that pressure, the expectations.
Now, Dana, is Sweeney Todd been mounted 4 separate times because the students keep returning to that, each new group of students, or is that like a Harvard tradition?
No, it's a very, very popular show. I would say of the musicals, it's one that just rears its head more than any other. Because sometimes they'll have some of the opera groups trying it on campus. Sometimes it'll be a musical theater group. So different ways of spinning it, because it does kind of sit on that border between, it is more of like an operetta. But yeah, it's like every 4 years, almost like clockwork. Like once a generation of students cycles out every 4 years, then somebody's like, well, we've never done Sweeney Todd. I'm like, well, yes, we did. It was just before you got here. So...
So Sweeney Todd, clearly great program, great show, great movie, but outside of the known shows, and if you don't feel the pressure of that, what kind of original productions do you guys do? Do you have an outlet for student penned shows and maybe some lesser known stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. The students do between 25 to 40 shows a semester across campus. That's we have several performance spaces around campus. And I would say about 20 to 25% of those shows each semester are original pieces, some of which are traditions that are supported by the structure of a student group. Like, for example, the Hasty Pudding Theatricals, they mount an original farce each year. And I'm also the faculty advisor for the first year musical, which is it's a program that creates an entirely new musical for staffed only by first year students, so that if they've never done it before, they can try their hand at composing and book writing and choreography and directing and scenic design. And so those are 2 traditions, but we also have a lot of just very creative students. There was a group that formed recently called the Asian Student Arts Project, and that I was meeting with, put forward works by Asian playwrights, and we were realizing just the dearth of materials that are out there, because even some of the iconic shows you might think of were actually all written by white people. If you think of Miss Saigon and Flower Drum Song and Pacific Overtures. So they wrote a completely original musical because there wasn't as much material out there, and it was a huge success. It sold out. It was called the East Side. It was kind of like a Asian version of In the Heights, but it was very, very well done. I swear that composer, Julia Rouge, she's going to be somebody that we'll be talking about on other podcasts soon. She's a really amazing composer.
Well, that's excellent. That's a really great story. But I hate to put a damper on this, but you seem to really enjoy what you do, and you seem to have a really good passion for it. Current climates as they are, how has that affected your ability to connect with your students? I got to imagine that theater itself doesn't lend itself to distance learning very well. It's a very tactile production. It's a very tactile thing to do. So how have you adapted with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Because it was actually one of the hardest things that I had to do was meeting with all of the student groups who had invested a huge amount of work in their productions, to basically tell them that your show is canceled, you're going home, all the work you've done so far cannot be seen this semester. One of those shows being the first year musical that I'm the advisor for, and these students have worked so hard creating this entirely new musical. So, we're going to try to mount it next semester. Several of the other shows that had spring residencies this year, we're going to try to accommodate next year. But then it also means fewer opportunities next year. So it's tough. I also have a huge concern for my alumni. Freelance artists who are out there working in the field who just had like everything dry up. I had a student who was going to be making her Broadway orchestral debut playing, lead keyboard in the Company revival with Patti LuPone. And they were just shy of opening night, and, the show is on ice for right now.
Well, it's interesting you use the terms on ice because earlier this week or towards the end of last week, Disney announced that Frozen will be closing on Broadway. And I got to think that this won't be the only production that shutters its doors for good or doesn't reopen when Broadway comes back, which, I mean, right now I think I'm part of the Wicked email club. So I think that the earliest they're selling tickets for right now is the second week of September to allow people back into the theaters. So in that vein, kind of a two-part question. What do you see in your crystal ball as just an observer of the arts and observer of shows, what COVID-19 is how it's going to affect the theater going forward for the next, let's say, year, in terms of shows shutting down and stuff like that? And really, is there a way for us to support local community theaters or even some of the young adults at Harvard or your programs as well? Is there a way for us to support those? The first part of the question, say there's no sugarcoating it. I mean, it is absolutely devastating to this industry. I mean, it is eviscerating this industry. I mean, the number of people that it takes to put on a show, and that income is just completely yanked from everybody, from actors to stagehands to ushers and box office personnel, and it's going to be a very tough road coming out of it too, because how comfortable are people going to be sitting in crowded theaters to see a piece of art? So it's very tough right now. And in regards to things that you can do, you can absolutely and please always donate money. There are some great causes out there. Broadway Cares, Equity Fights AIDS, the Actors Fund, all of the unions that are in New York, the IATSE, the International Association of Theatrical Stage Employees, all of these unions are running funds to help the people that have been unemployed. You can also just sign up for email lists from your local theater to keep showing your support to them, to see what they're up to, because they will ask people for what they need. And also follow artists on social media and support their work, because right now, I mean, there's tens of thousands, if not more, actors and performers that are out there who are generating spectacular content and who are doing everything they can to keep up their creativity. So my hope, and I'll end on this optimistic note, is that my hope is that coming out of this crisis, there will be a renaissance of art. That I'm hoping that everybody all of these amazingly creative people who are stuck at home are creating content and creating new shows and generating new ideas. And so that, out of the darkness always comes, the brightest lights. So that's what my hope is. But it will be a long process to get there.
Dana, are you familiar with the platform Cameo?
Yes. I bought my sister one.
That's all I could think of when you said all these artists are, because I have some friends who work on Broadway, and I follow a lot of the Broadway stars on social media, and a lot of them who have never thought of doing this before have turned this platform Cameo, and basically, if you want an A-list Broadway star to record a birthday greeting for your mom or an intro to your podcast, now is the time to do it.
Oh, yeah. My sister is a huge fan of Chips and was always crushing on Larry Wilcox from Chips. And so I happened to go on there and I saw that he was available. So I sent her an empty nest message because both of her kids were in college this year. And she flipped out. She thought it was just the greatest thing that Larry Wilcox sent her a private video message. Do we get sponsorship from Cameo, by the way?
No, we don't.
I feel like we'll be sending Tim an email to Tim. Go reach out to Cameo and see if they can be the sponsor of the program going forward. So in that vein of supporting your artists, local artists, however you can, let's just get back to Disney. Kind of supporting artists, I mean, in this instance, or different revenue streams for these guys, and you've kind of touched on it a little bit, but let's look at it. The Disney paid $75 million for the quote-unquote movie theater rights to show the original cast production of Hamilton. It was supposed to come out fall of 2022, I believe. So we're looking at that, and we got a press release, not personally, but they released that they're actually going to be showing it on Disney Plus beginning on this July 3rd instead. This isn't the first time. Obviously, Rent had a theatrical release when it was closing on Broadway, and Newsies has a stage production out there. There's several other instances where they've had stage productions. Fathom Events does a lot of these operas and various shows. Is that a solid revenue stream? Are you for or against these shows using that medium to expand their audiences?
I think it's absolutely essential. I think this is what the industry needs to move towards. I mean, particularly with ticket prices getting insanely expensive for just cause. I mean you have to support. Literally hundreds of people are involved in mounting a show each night. So the prices are going to keep getting more and more expensive. But so to make theater accessible to people who don't have the resources to take their family to Broadway, I think it's huge for that. I think, and I think that it's just where it's the natural progression of where we're headed. And I think this crisis is particularly, kicking us much farther down that line. That you always have to adapt, and theater always has. Theater has always been able to incorporate new technologies into what they do to make things snazzier, sharper, more exciting. From the incorporation of projection designs now, like in Frozen, if you watch was it the Let It Go that was performed, it was on either on The View or the Today Show. I mean, the projection design is just stunning. So I think the technology is heading that way, and I think it's just a way to make theater more accessible to everybody.
Now, why is there in the past been kind of a aversion from Broadway to quote unquote give it away and make this more accessible by putting on screens rather than in a theater in one place in New York City or in a theater when it's on tour?
I think the consumer is much more savvy now. I mean, you have to, there are so many options to spend your entertainment dollars that you have to know what you're getting into. So there was a time where if you had spectacular special effects involved with your production, you would want to hide those from the population, because it was that mentality of like, oh, well, if you want to see the chandelier fall in Phantom of the Opera, if you want to see the helicopter come up in Miss Saigon, if you want to see these exceptional things, you have to pay the price of admission. Whereas now, there's everything is just competing for your attention. I mean, just stand in the middle of Times Square and look around at how many advertisements are there. So you need to start showing your big moments. So, which is why Frozen actually aired both For the First Time and Forever and Let It Go in their entirety on the Today Show and The View. I'm not sure which number was on which version. which kind of surprised me at first, but then I was like, oh, okay, it makes sense. Yeah, you have to show them this is what's going to happen. This is the cool effect. This is how Elsa changes her dress mid-song while she's standing on the center of the stage. Like, the dress just changes in front of your eyes. So then, if people see that, they'll still pay the money to go see it live. It's not like they're going to see that and be like, okay, well, now I have no cost to. They'll see it and they'll be like, okay, if that's spectacular, I want to see the rest of what they're offering up.
Yeah, no, those are all very valid points about that, and I agree with you. But a counterpoint to this is one that when you look at certain screen adaptations, let's look at like Jersey Boys or Into the Woods or Dreamgirls or Chicago or Rent or even Once, which was kind of a reverse of it started on the screen and then went to a Broadway show. In not the direct literal taking a stage show and showing it on screen, but really adapting it to the screen. They haven't all been successful. Is that just... Let's look at Rent. Chris Columbus, probably not a guy I would have picked to direct that film. I actually enjoy the film. I think it's actually really well done, and the casting changes that they did make, I think you had to do some of that to make it accessible to a more mainstream audience. But overall, the screen adaptations of these musicals don't necessarily translate to box office dollars in the movie theater. Why do you think that is?
I think it has to make sense for the story. I think one of the things with Rent is part of the appeal was that when you were going into that theater, there were not elaborate sets or anything. It was, you felt like you were in a downtown performance art venue, even though you were sitting in a Broadway theater. You felt like you were part of this grungy Alphabet City world, and it just had, I think, some problems kind of escalating up, whereas other pieces lend themselves a little bit better to cinematic quality. Dreamgirls, for example, was even the original production of that, which I think it was Michael Bennett who created. It was very cinematic in how it was staged. They had like a turntable, so there was this idea that you were kind of watching the Dreamgirls performing on stage, and then it would turn and you'd be seeing backstage, and there was a theatricality to it that actually does transfer. I'm sorry, not a theatricality, a cinematic quality that translates very well to the movie version.
Yeah, I think Dreamgirls suffers from, I like to call it an overabundance of talent, an embarrassment of riches with the cast they put together. You had Jamie Foxx, Eddie Murphy, Anika Noni Rose, Jennifer Hudson, Beyonce. It was just really a dynamite cast. Dreamgirls is actually really well done. That's a very good point. And I agree with you on Rent. I had the opportunity to see Rent on one of the revivals on Broadway, and I will tell you that when you walk into that theater and you almost have the ghost of Jonathan Larson there, it's a really cool thing. I was sad when it did finally close again. Maybe we'll get a revival later on. You never know. What's old is new again on Broadway, just like in Hollywood. So I certainly think it, never say never, as it were. But
Dana,
let's have a little.
Can I throw you a curveball real quick?
Yeah.
What show that hasn't had a cinematic adaptation would you most like to see a full-on Hollywood cinematic adaptation of?
I think Book of Mormon has the potential to be really hilarious as a film. It's been tremendously successful musical, but I think that that comedy could do well. I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good one.
But Bob, I just wanted to share with you, I saw the original cast of Rent, like everybody that was in that movie, on stage, and I was in the front row for it. I was a college student at the time and bought one of those rush tickets, but it's one of those moments where I was there. It was like just a couple months after it opened.
I'll tell you that would be one that you'd probably never forget. I would think that's a cast and a half for the Broadway show.
And at the time, there were no names. It was like Idina Oh, who's it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, certainly. I actually fell ass backwards when I was going to the local community college here. I was taking Intro to Theater, and I did end up going to see the original cast of Wicked after, and actually in its preview runs at the Gershwin, it wasn't even officially open yet, and I will tell you that I will never forget it, and with Joel Grey as the Wizard and Norbert Leo Butz as Fierro. I mean, just a really solid cast. And then Kristen Chenoweth and Idina Menzel as well. Again, just a dynamite cast. And I really think back to, tied to Disney, is Joel Grey was one of the first guests on The Muppet Show back in the day. So really, really cool stuff to see Joel Grey as the Wizard. It was quite an experience to see that cast together. So I can imagine the Rent cast would be out of this world. But that theater, it's something. It's kind of like a little hole in the wall place, the Nederlander down there where Rent took place. It was very much the perfect storm, I think, with a brilliant writer and a great cast and a great home theater for that show. We could probably do a 2-hour podcast on Rent, but I don't know how many people we would actually get to listen. Well, there are a lot of Rent heads out there, so maybe we would get some.
Well, and that theater, the Nederlander, was also a derelict theater that the Nederlander organization took over just for Rent, so they were allowed to make it even grungier to fit the show.
Yeah, it's seriously, if you have any Rent heads that haven't been there, it's a little bit different now. I forget what's playing there now, and I think when after the production I saw there was supposed to be a Houdini musical that was going to open there. I don't think the Houdini musical ever saw the light of day. Maybe it did for a little bit, but ultimately, like I said, I'd never say never with Rent coming back, because it's one of those that seems to pick up steam every once in a while that you get a revival of it. Similar to Cats. Cats has 9 lives, but let's go rapid fire with Dana and Tim and Jordana and Drew and myself, and these are just going to be the first thing that pops into your mind. We're gonna start with favorite Broadway musical. Dana, as the guest, we will let you lead off here. So your favorite Broadway musical?
I had to pick 2 just because they're so different. Falsettos, I think, is my favorite chamber piece. It's a 7-person cast, but just stunning. And then it's contrary to what I just was saying earlier in the episode, Sweeney Todd. Sweeney Todd. Just for its scale, the music is just brilliant.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Excellent. Tim?
I've been a fan since I was a little kid. Got to go with Phantom of the Opera.
Alrighty. That's, good show. It's a great show. So I can understand that. Jordana, what about you?
Jesus Christ Superstar.
I thought you were swearing at me for a second. Thank you. Thank you for clearing that up. Drew, what about you, buddy?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I enjoy theater. I don't know the difference between musical and non-musical as much, but I'm gonna have to say Spamalot. I mean, it's Monty Python on a theater performance, and not close behind, a Book of Mormon was excellent.
Yeah, you've always been a Book of Mormon guy, so I was not surprised when you brought that up, because you are always you've always been a Book of Mormon guy. So for me, it's Hamilton and Rent, probably a 1-2, and Wicked's in there. But Hamilton is just such a great show, and I know it's so easy to just Hamilton, it's Hamilton. It's an excellent show. I'm a history guy at heart, and Hamilton just I like the talent involved. It's a great production. So Dana, your favorite non-musical, maybe a drama, play, or a strictly theatrical production that isn't a musical?
This is more of an experience, but Sleep No More. When it was performing in Boston, it was set in this abandoned school, and it was set in all of the rooms, and it was a production of Macbeth that was set in like Alfred Hitchcock noir, that you walked through it. I mean, you walked through the gym, and it was set up as like, this forest, and you would just happen into rooms and see like Lady Macbeth was scrubbing the blood off her hands, and the dialogue was just happening, but you were discovering it. It was like this voyeuristic, like just this stunning, mind-changing, piece.
Oh, pardon the expression. That sounds wicked To be honest with you, that sounds like a really solid production. Now, was that kind of like, was that like a limited engagement thing that they were doing, or is that kind of, you might be able to catch it once in a while, or?
It was. Well, the American Repertory helped stage it with now I'm forgetting the name of the London company but they transferred it to New York, and it's been running for years and years down in New York. So I think it's still running. You might still be able to see it there.
Excellent. Tim, what about you?
Might be some recency bias, but the 2018 revival of To Kill a Mockingbird. I'm a sucker for Sorkin dialogue, and to see Jeff Daniels in the starring role was something else.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. You're a big Aaron Sorkin guy. That's not surprising to me. So, Jordana, what about you?
I'm going Of Mice and Men.
Oh, it's a classic. So you're bringing us back to the classics. Thank you for that. Drew, for you, what do you got?
Big fan of the Peter Pan show, and Bob, let's throw in Little Shop of Horrors for me and you throwback.
Little Shop of Horrors is a musical.
Well, whatever. Peter Pan was not.
Peter Pan was not. Fair enough. So your favorite non-musical show is Peter Pan. Excellent stuff. Mine probably going to be Our Town, or if we're going local, I would have to go with Christmas Carol that Trinity Repertory Company puts on in Providence every year. It's a great show, and it's usually pretty entertaining. They've had women play Scrooge. They've had black men play Scrooge, which I don't know why that's such a big deal, but I think anybody that's talented enough could play the role. So, and in fact, I think that might be a little bit of foreshadowing for a couple questions away. Dana, your favorite theater in New York?
On topic, it is the New Amsterdam. It's stunning. It's art nouveau. It's a lot of wildlife themes that are in all the sculptural elements. So I mean, it's just stunning.
Oh, it is. It's a beautiful theater. You're absolutely right, and well worth the money they put into it. So, Tim, what about you, sir?
I got two, the Winter Garden and the Gershwin. The Winter Garden because it's the first Broadway theater I remember distinctly going to as a kid, and then Gershwin is just great theater, especially with Wicked there.
Yeah, Drew, what about you, buddy?
I don't know if I'd really call this a theater, but I'm going to go with Ellen's Stardust Diner, which is a fun little place to enjoy a show while you have some dinner or lunch or breakfast.
Hey, that's the beauty about Random House of Mouse. It's completely random. So
that's it. Then that is random.
Tim, I'm sitting with you on this one, pal. The Gershwin is a beautiful theater. I do love the Gershwin myself. And for the reasons we talked about with Rent, I would put the Nederlander on there too, maybe for sentimentality for me on that one. Dana, favorite production you've ever been a part of?
My Fair Lady. In college, I played Professor Henry Higgins, one of the greatest roles in musical theater canon.
Yeah, that's a good role there. That's an excellent role. So, Jordana, what about you?
I was the Good Witch in Wizard of Oz in a middle school production. I was in 7th grade, and that was the beginning and the end of my acting career. And I didn't pursue it from there.
Well, what happened?
I wasn't that good.
Oh, come on.
That's why I've never tried being in theater.
Not even in 7th grade when everything's embarrassing in middle school.
Nope.
All right. Well, my next friend, my next guy here will tell us about his experiences in theater, I believe, in 7th or 8th grade as well. Drew, what about you?
Yeah, it was also 8th grade. You know me, I'm not shy, but I got to play Scrooge from the Christmas Carol. It was a lot of fun.
Now, that wasn't at Trinity Repertory, people, just so we're clear. That was at, I believe, St. Kevin's was the local. So, for me, I have two roles that I really enjoyed. I went with Howie Newsom, the milkman in Our Town. He's kind of... he's got an invisible horse named Bessie. At least I had an invisible horse because, again, I was at St. Kevin's. We had a very small budget for this. And I was actually Albert Dussel and Anne Frank as well the next year. So a lot of good stuff. A lot of good memories there, too.
So you weren't going the drunk guy from The Wanderer?
No, I mean, I don't like baseball, so I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, boy. So, Dana, I think we've talked about it a little bit, but what's your favorite movie version of a musical?
You just cannot beat The Sound of Music. It's so much better than the stage show. Like it's just perfect.
Oh, it's an all-time classic. I mean, it is. I mean, I'm kicking myself for not coming up with that myself, but that's an excellent pick. Tim, what about you, sir?
Hedwig and the Angry Inch.
Oh, look at you going. I mean, I think I graduated from high school. What did that come out? 2001, maybe? I think I was a junior in high school when that came out. I never really. Excellent pick. Jordana, what about you?
West Side Story.
Basic. I love it. Drew?
Yeah, we talked about it a few times tonight, but nothing as good as an old Sweeney Todd.
You're a mark for Burton, and you know it.
100%. Not going to deny that one.
Excellent. I've gone back and forth. I'm actually going to go with Once. I really enjoyed Once. I think the soundtrack's really well done. It's kind of like an independent movie, and it did actually get a Broadway musical after. So certainly a sweet little movie. And I don't know. That's pretty much it. I mean, there's a lot of good musicals out there. I do enjoy Rent. I think I'm in the minority with that, but I do enjoy the movie version of Rent as well. But for me, guys, that's all I have with Random House of Mouse. Before we throw it to Drew, I think it's only right. Normally, I would ask our guest at this time, Dana, if they wanted to sell any books or website addresses or T-shirts or something like that. But for you, I want to do it a little bit differently tonight. I would actually like you to kind of give an inspirational salutation to the kids out there that maybe the 7th or 8th grader like Tim that wasn't comfortable going out to theater or to get on stage, and what you would say to the next generation of actors and actresses out there and motivate them to get out there and keep it alive.
I would just encourage, all students to, at some point in their lives, try to get involved in theater. There's so many different ways to do it. You can help out with carpentry or sewing, or if performing's not your thing, or, choreography or directing, or writing, composing, doing whatever. There's so many different fields to kind of explore, and the reason why I gravitate towards theater over other art forms is because it, at its core, it's a collaboration. And it's such an amazing community of people. Most of the time, you can always get bad batches here and there, but it's just such a tight community, and there's such an exhilarating feeling when you've created something that has taken that long, has incorporated so many people and so many different ideas, and then you get to that opening night and you hear the applause. It's so validating, and it's so creative, and it's so community building. So try it.
Well said. Well, again, Dana, thank you for coming on. I had a great time. Tim, great work, guiding us through that. Jordana, Andrew, thank you guys very much. And Drew, take us home, buddy.
Yep, thanks again, Dana. Absolutely, I agree with Bob. This was a great episode. It's been in the making for a long time. So that is going to wrap up this week's episode of Disney Theatrical Productions. If you have any feedback, questions, or comments, please send us an email at the Disney Guys Uncensored @gmail.com. And as always, remember to reach out to Jordana Izzo once this virus goes away and you start planning some vacation. Reach out to her over at Travelmation, an authorized Disney vacation planner who is now earmarked platinum status with Disney Destinations. So that she can be reached at jordanizzo@travelmation.net. We can be found on pretty much all social media, so if you're not following us, make sure you follow us: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, where we have a lot of cool stuff coming out. And as I mentioned above, consider joining us over on Patreon. We have a lot of amazing content for those $2 a month. And lastly, if you want some super cool merchandise, like some coasters, a mug, socks, sweater, hat, I don't know, go over to Redbubble and search the Disney Guys Uncensored, or head over to our details tab under our show description, where you can find all of our links, including our social media handles. So we hope you enjoyed this show, and thanks for listening to the Disney Guys Uncensored.
May Walt Disney World bring joy and inspiration and new knowledge to all who come to this happy place.